Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Dad, welcome aboard for this week's episode of the Father on Purpose podcast. You have Ken Evans here and Lawson Brown. Excited to be with you. And you're welcome, because in advance, you're going to thank us later because we have a very special guest with us today. Before I dive into who that is and what he's going to talk about, I want to remind you, every week we push out what we think is a helpful newsletter to about 20,000 dads. So jump on in. It's free. You can go to our website, manhoodjourney.org, and snag your free copy of Mountain Monday, because, Dad, let's face it, every week you've got mountains to climb, and some weeks you might need a little help to climb them. And that's what we're here to help you do. This week on the podcast, we have Josh Hatcher. And if you're a podcaster and you're paying any attention at all, you've probably listened to his Manhood Mancast. It's amazing. So if you need another podcast to go listen to the Manhood Mancast. Josh is not only a really good podcast guy, he asks great questions, he interviews terrific guests. Not only does he do all that, he's a very friendly and helpful guy behind the scenes. Josh has helped me, coaching me a little bit on this podcast. So if we're running this podcast into the ditch, that is mainly Josh's fault. So we brought him on here today to own up to all the bad advice he's been giving us. No, Josh has been tremendous. Josh, we're delighted to have you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm real glad to be here, man.
Yeah. Hey, Josh. You are an example of something we've talked about before here, where we're about reaching as many men, in our case dads, in your case just men generally, but also and we want to provide value, we want to encourage guys, but it's also like the underlying reason is because Kent and I genuinely feel like there's a problem with men, in the world today, standing up, stepping up, being unified together in how we represent manlyhood and fatherhood, in our case specifically. Before we get into some of that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, of course, but introduce kind of where are you with family, what's going on in your life, where are your kids and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I've borne the name Dad for 24 years, which is pretty cool. My wife and I went to college at Liberty University in Virginia, and I always tell everybody I saw the best and the worst that Christianity had to offer while I was there. So I think that's a fair way to say that. Although I have a coworker who went to some other Baptist college that was like super strict, and I'm like, maybe I didn't see the worst. But we went to Liberty University, and
where did you meet her?
So that's another whole story. We could talk for an hour about that part of the story.
Oh, really?
In our sister dorm. We didn't have like fraternities and sororities. We had brother dorms and sister dorms, and
right.
Crazy story there. But maybe we'll talk about that if you have me on again. You want to talk about that part of things. But I met her. She was in my sister dorm, and we just did everything together all the time. Our friend group was always together. And eventually I kind of realized that the only person in the friend group I was really talking to was her. And she was my best friend. And when I say eventually, I'm talking like a couple weeks.
Oh, wow.
So by October 3rd, I knew I was madly in love with this girl. October 4th, it sealed the deal. I knew I was going to marry her. I just knew.
Man, you measure time in very finite increments there, Josh.
This is
impressive.
October 4th, so that's just a couple of months, Anyway, so I told her, you're the kind of girl I want to marry. And she says, well, you're the kind of guy I want to marry. And that's a completely different thing. But I'm dating Jesus for 6 months. She was on this dating fast, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not going anywhere. We're best friends, and we do everything together all the time anyway. Which I don't know if that was the answer she wanted to hear or not. But we just kept spending time together, and somehow I tricked her into thinking I was actually worth marrying, and actually God, like, man, I'm telling you, God called us to be married. It was a specific, I actually sat down, I knew it, I'd been to several church services and chapel services, and when God's speaking to you and it's like everywhere, and then we're thick-headed, so we're like Gideon and we're laying out the fleece, and I'm like, I go back to my dorm room, and I don't recommend Bible study this way, but I pulled up my good old-fashioned Baptist KJV Schofield Bible that I got for a graduation present, and I'm flipping through it, and it's like, God, I need you to speak to me, because what I'm getting here is that you want me to ask this girl to marry me and to do it quickly rather than to focus on graduating college and all of that stuff. And I'm like, so you're going to have to show me. So I open up the word and I, close my eyes, flip through a page and pick a verse at random. And it says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing.
Oh, that's not true. Does that really happen?
No, listen, I'm not done. I'm like, God, come on. That's coincidence. So 5 times, 5 verses. It was, he who finds a wife finds a good thing. And then it was, rejoice in the wife of your youth. May her breasts satisfy you always. I did it again, and it was, it's better to marry than to burn with lust. And it was 5 verses right in a row.
Wow.
And like, I didn't get any filler. I didn't it was completely random, eyes closed, flip the pages, point on a verse. So I called her dad and I asked her for her hand, but her dad was like, no, what are you talking about? So I told her that, and she said, well, I'm not worried about that then. She goes, she said, if you ask me, I'll say, yeah. So I asked her, and we got married on July 4th, 1998. So we're coming up on 25 years here.
Yeah.
And a few months into our marriage, just not long at all into our marriage, I get up one morning, and she always wakes up before I do, and she's sitting at the kitchen table crying with her Bible open. Like, what's the matter, honey? I think God's telling me to have a baby. We've just got married. And I said, honey, he's going to have to tell me, like it's going to have to be both of us. And she's like, no, I just feel like that's what God's telling me. And I'm like, okay, and again, for her, when God speaks, it usually doesn't take as many times as it takes me. So when she knows God's speaking, I trust her, but I needed to know because I was fighting it. So I'm like, when he tells me, we'll have babies. So I'll tell you what, dude, every church service that I went to, every chapel service that I went to, every time I would turn on the radio, it was a preacher, and he was talking about, the verse that kept coming up everywhere was children are a blessing from the Lord.
Right.
Every one of them, everywhere. And I mean, and this was a couple weeks where it was constant, Wednesday night church, there's 3 chapel services at school, and it was constant everywhere. And I'm like, I'd open up my own devotions, and I'm expecting to read about the things that at that point that I was dealing with, which were not children. And it was all about parenting. And that verse kept coming over and over. And I remember it'd been about 2 weeks, and I came home from work, and I'm in my car, and she's in the house, and I'm driving home. And while I'm driving home, I turned the radio 3 or 4 times. And in that 3 or 4 times, I heard that verse on 3 Christian stations. And then I turned it to the secular station, and it's the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon. I'm like, okay, this is what's going on here. I get home, and I was done. And I just put my head on the steering wheel, and I'm like, God, if this is what you're telling me to do, I'm sorry that I'm so stubborn. I just need one more. Just one more.
Wow.
One more time, I'm in.
Wow. He's very patient with you.
I know. I get out of the car. I walk to the front door, and right there in the mailbox was a Focus on the Family newsletter, which I'm sure we hadn't subscribed to. And I pick it up, and it was a picture of these little kids with a puppy dog, and it said, children are a blessing from the Lord.
Come on.
So I walked inside. I threw the newsletter down on the table. I walked in the bathroom and threw the birth control away. And we had twins on our 1-year wedding anniversary.
Oh, that's cool.
Gosh, that's so
the 4th of July, 1990.
Instant family. Instant family.
We had twins. So.
And so how many other kids?
Cool
so you had twins 1 year in. How many other kids?
Yeah,
if any?
We had a boy and a girl.
Okay.
Isaiah and Michaela. And then we had another son. And again, the next time around, when God told her that it was time to have kids, I said, yep, I'm not arguing. I just
there we go.
So
you learned your lesson.
Abram was also a called child. She's like, I really feel like God's calling us to have a kid. And then Shiloh, our youngest, who is now 18, and she's the homecoming queen, and she's going to graduate high school here soon. Also, it was a called by God. So, when he just said, this is what I want you to do. So we said, okay, we're going to make a baby. So,
wow, man, congratulations. So that's 4 total children.
Yeah, 4 total children.
And you're almost about to be an empty nester.
Yeah, just about. And then my twins each have a kid. So,
whoa, Grandpa Josh.
Yeah, I'm a grandpa.
What's your name, by the way? What's your grandpa name?
So,
Dorothy, bop, beep, beep.
Dorothy calls me Papa and Ampa, and sometimes she can say Grandpa. She calls my wife Yaya.
Yaya. Oh, that's a good one. I like that.
And then the other one's not talking much yet. So, but and then she actually, her husband has a couple of cousins that he raised when they were little, and so they've got a foster daughter as well that stays with them, and they're actually both downstairs. My wife is watching them, so I came in the door, they're watching VeggieTales. I'm like, all right, this is awesome. So
yeah, off to a good start.
Yep.
How about so fast forward some to starting your podcast. How did you get, not like technically or logistically, how did you get into this, but what was the genesis of, what I think I'm going to do is start? Yeah. And then, you come up with the name, you design it around what content you want to provide and what service you want to bring.
Yeah. So, Manhood started 10 years ago, and it was just a blog then. I always knew I wanted to do a podcast, but I had a background in radio, but it took me a while to just pull the trigger on doing the podcast. Cause I'm like, when you get in your head about something and you're like,
oh yeah,
I'm not ready for this. And Ryan Mickler at Order of Man, if you guys have ever listened to his podcast, which is fantastic, I would encourage you to check out. It's really like when you type podcast for men, it's Art of Manliness, and it's Ryan Mickler, Order of Man.
Yeah.
Right? It's number 1 or number 2, depending on the week. And Ryan was like, just start before you're ready. What are you waiting for? So, the pod, I don't even remember how long it's been. I think the podcast is like, I think it's like 6 or 7 years, but it was a few years in, and I'm like, okay, I have to do this. But 10 years ago, this year in May, is when Manhood was born. And it started because, so I was a youth pastor, a volunteer youth leader. I wasn't a pastor, but I was a volunteer youth leader at several different churches over the course of, since the time I graduated high school, I was doing that, and the one youth group that I was at that I really connected with these kids, I did it for the longest time. And, they all grew up and they entered the world, and they all started making horrible decisions, and they're dying of heroin overdoses.
Oh man, that's awful.
In prison for molesting kids. And they're, some of them are actually walking with Jesus today, but they're drugs and abuse and just and they were the bad kids. My youth group always had the bad kids, and they were always welcome and always loved. A lot of them have turned their lives around and are walking straight and narrow now. But for that first part there, I felt like almost like a burden. Like I had failed them. My job was to teach them. Actually, their parents' job is to teach them, but their parents didn't know any better most of the time. You know what I mean? Most of them made the worst decisions. There weren't any Christian influences in their home. So it was my job. And I kind of said, I had a great father. He was a professional clown.
Really?
Yeah, seriously.
Dude.
Professional clown. It's amazing.
I don't know if that's like the coolest dad in the world to have. Like you get endless air balloon puppets and stuff, little balloon puppets.
I would come home from school and the entire house. So he worked at the factory for his day job / swing shift job. So he was always, working weird hours. And I'd come home like when he was on a midnight or something. So or 4 o'clock, whatever. I'd come home and the house would be full of balloons where he was practicing. He would go to do a clown party like on a Saturday morning, and then afternoon, and come home, and he'd be like, all right, we're going out to dinner, because that was where his extra money for the extra stuff came from.
Right.
So we'd pack up in the car and go out to dinner with my dad, the clown, still dressed as a clown, and not think anything of it. It was the best. So I have so many. We could talk my dad as a clown again. That I've actually thought about doing a second podcast that's just
Just
like
clown tricks? No.
Yeah. Well, actually, so I actually did it with him for a while, and I did it on my own for a while. I found that I am too impatient of a person to do it professionally. Now my oldest daughter is starting a clowning business. So, but I've thought about like, it would be kind of cool. Like I know all the tricks and I know what you need to do. So I thought about like launching a podcast that tells my dad's clown stories and maybe teaches people to do it. But I'm not sure that I really want to mess with all that. So it's kind of like in the back of my mind. But anyway, my dad.
You know what's interesting about that, Josh, is that my kids occasionally refer to me as a clown, but I've never actually been in the clown business.
Right.
I don't know. Should I take that personally or is that a compliment? I don't know.
You actually would make a great clown. One, you've got a great clown face.
Oh,
my dad always says, yes.
We're back on the side.
Yes. My dad would look at you and he'd be like, you have a great clown face. Like that was his best.
And that was supposed to be a compliment.
Yes, but it's true. You do. Your face is structured where I could picture the makeup.
That's fantastic.
And the kind of nose you would wear. But no, you really, I think, and you've
That's fantastic.
Humor where you're kind of quick on your feet. So I think,
my word. But I can't do the puppets. But anyway, so let me ask you a question. That's a very interesting accidental segue into how you were fathered and what you saw from your dad, which was both fun, I would guess, but also hardworking. The guy was holding down a couple jobs and working, extra stuff to have a little folding money for dinner, that kind of thing. I'm curious, what kind of lessons do you think that your dad taught you? What's, one or two lessons that you tried to replicate as a dad yourself?
Yeah, because that is really the heart of what started Manlyhood. Was I recognized that needed to happen. The things he taught me, I needed to pass on. And so one of those is, you can learn something from anybody, and you need to try to learn something from anybody. He was always kind to everybody. There was, the intellectually disabled guy that would walk around town picking up pop cans. He would always be kind to him and talk to him. And
wow,
he was like autistic and super powered in the way that he knew everything about small engines. And so dad would always ask him questions to fix his lawnmower, and like learn from this guy and model to us. If you ever see anybody picking on him downtown, you stick up for him. You let me know if it's somebody that you don't feel comfortable looking up to. But, that defense of the weaker person, but also that understanding that person had value just for who he was. That's one of the things that I think, my dad taught me. And so like, that is a lesson that I take into what I do at Manlyhood for sure. And I try to pass on to my kids because, you can, like, I can't stand maybe certain politicians, for example, they drive me nuts, but if I take the time to listen, I can learn from them. They may say something really good, and I have to be humble enough to recognize and understand that even the guy that I can't stand and the guy that's absolutely wrong on 90% of everything might be right on 1% of the thing to actually pay attention to. So we have to be smart enough to recognize truth where it's lying.
Wow.
We can pick it up and we can work with it. That's one of the things my dad taught me.
Wow. What a great life lesson.
Other things he taught me is, I tell this story a lot, and I have to tell it because it really encapsulates the man that he was. We had a big garden, and our property was right on the town swimming hole, and all the kids from town would come and swim there in the summer. And he caught some boys. They weren't in school that day, and he caught them stealing from the garden. They're going to the garden and stealing, and your first response when that would happen would be like, what are you stupid kids? Get out of my garden,
And you read my mind.
But dad paid attention, and he knew what was happening, and he knew these kids, and he knew their dad. And I just knew that these kids were mean to me on the school bus. Like, they would pick on me. They would call me names. We'd be in school. They'd shove me into lockers. I was bullied horribly in school. And these boys were 3 of the ones who did. So I came home from school, and here's my dad helping them build a rabbit trap in the yard, like a box trap to catch rabbits. And because we raised meat rabbits and stuff, growing up, which, gosh, we could talk about all the lessons I learned from that. But, and he's building them a rabbit trap, and he's sending them home with like bags of stuff. And I'm like, and I
Wow.
in there in the yard playing and hanging out and having fun and talking to my dad. And I was kind of mad.
Mm-hmm.
I went out, dad called me over, and I just kind of came over and then said hi and then went in the house. And I told him later, I'm like, Dad, why are you nice to those boys? And he told me what happened. And he said, you don't know what somebody's going through. He says, those boys have nothing. Those boys were stealing from the garden because they were starving. And I taught them how to catch a rabbit. And then we took one of the rabbits and we butchered them, and I showed them how to butcher a rabbit, and I sent them home with the meat and told them how to cook it, and he taught these boys and basically taught them how to survive because, the dad was drinking and smoking up all the money. They had nothing. And what was really funny is after that, and I didn't like those boys. You know what I mean? I had no intention of hanging out with those boys. And I really never hung out with them, but I'll tell you what, after that day, those boys wouldn't let anybody pick on me, and they would get in fights.
Oh, wow.
Because
so check this out.
Took care of them. Yeah.
Josh, we just recently finished Romans 12. We broke Romans 12 into some parts throughout various episodes. And it ends Romans, 12:1, it goes to 21. 20 and 21 are where we finished, like just recently. 20 says, on the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. What a great, that garden story, and your dad hooking those guys up and having the wisdom and perspective to say, you never know where someone's coming from, son. And then that turned that whole thing around for you in your life at school. What kind of, you seem like a storyteller, and I love that. How do you use examples in your life now for your own children and maybe even, your children's children, as far as fatherhood and our role as dads? We talk a lot about the importance of a father. The mom is super important, but statistics and everything else will also reinforce that dads are so critical. What kinds of conversations do you have with your kids where you're reflecting back and maybe, giving them some life lessons like your dad did?
So it's all the time, especially when they were home, and stories that's the thing, man. I think that's really how we learn. That's how I learn. And so, we tell stories and we laugh and we goof off, but, my hope is that I instilled in them every story has a moral, even if it's just a silly, goofy, funny, ridiculous story, there's a moral there if you look for it, and that goes back to what my dad taught me, is you can learn something from everybody. And so I think I tried to always teach them to look for the moral lesson in the thing. So I think that's part of it. The other thing is this, my kids were homeschooled. My daughter just recently, I think 10th grade is when she's the last one, and now we're lazy. So we sent her to the high school. But, so now she's a senior and graduating, but the rest all graduated from a virtual charter school. And so they went to school at home. And for a lot of that time, on and off, I worked from home. So we spent a lot of time together. And, and I recognize not everybody can homeschool, and I don't think everybody should. But if you can, or if you think you might, you ought to consider it, because that time with your kids is so much better than having someone else tell them what, they don't know. You can preach morality on Sunday morning, or have a preacher preach morality to them, and then maybe have a youth group or a Sunday school class where they get more of it. But where it matters is how you live your life, and they have to see you living your life.
Yeah.
They can't understand it until they see how you react when the bad guy hurts you. They don't know they don't recognize what the morality means until they're spending time with you and doing the thing and seeing how you react. And here's the other thing, guys. The earlier days of parenting is, I used to joke all the time. I'd say, parenting is about doing the best you can and letting therapy sort them out later. And now that they're all adults and in therapy, I know how true that actually is. But here's the thing that every young dad especially has to just be real with, you're going to screw it up. You are going to mess it up. You're going to make mistakes, and your kids are going to be worse for it. And I think honestly, just accepting that is going to allow you to say,
Yeah.
I'm going to do the best I can.
Man, Josh, we have so many dads who have for years told us through surveys and face-to-face and at events that they feel like they're failing as a dad. And I always tell them, congratulations. Like, absolutely. Like we're not God, we're not the Alpha and the Omega, and we don't have to be everything to our children. That's why we're like the direction pointers. We're like a Sherpa. We point our kids to the Father. Now we want to be as godly of a dad as we can, but at the same time, man, I gave up on perfection a long time ago, mainly because I read this book. I think it's called the Book of Genesis, and it's about a perfect dad whose kids went off the rails anyway. So I thought, gee, why try that? Because there was this one perfect father, God the Father, and his kids did the wrong thing anyhow. So for me, we got to let guys do that. I love that you've steered us in this direction, because for sure, so many dads come at us feeling this pressure of like, they've got to be perfect. And man, we got to dial that out. In that light, can you think of a time or two as a dad where, you learned from your own mistakes as a father, or it don't have to bare your soul or tell some super secret thing about one of your children, but maybe share with a dad listening, where have you gotten it wrong as a dad and look back and said, man, if I could do that over again, I might've done that a little differently. Can you think of an example or two?
The past 24 years of parenting, I would do it all.
How many examples do you want?
I'm at this stage now where I'm finding myself regretting so much. Like, and it's like, I'm actually struggling with the shame of it, to be completely honest with you. Like, I see in my kids the results of the things that I did wrong a lot. And I'm like, man, I planted that seed, and now here's the fruit. And so like regret, I think, is what happens like at different points, and so that's kind of that season I'm in right now. But it's actually been good for me, because what I've been trying to do is to be humble and to come to them and say, you remember how when this is one that's kind of fresh, and it actually has to do with being a husband as much a dad. For whatever reason, I didn't understand my wife's emotion and her her emotional health and things like that. And so if something was happening in our family or our life, or something was happening that I thought was going to cause her to be emotional, I would try to shield her from it. And I would tell all the kids, hey, look, your mom's in a bad mood today, so just stay away from her, or I would say, hey, look, you don't need to tell your mom about that, because that's going to get her upset. I did that all the time.
Oh, wow.
Time.
Yeah.
And my, a couple years ago, my wife and I were, we're going through a real hard time, and I didn't realize how lonely I made her, because I built this wall around her to keep everybody away, the kids all away from her, so they wouldn't hurt her. And they just kind of like, I actually built distance in between them, and almost a lack of trust, or a little bit of a fear of how she would see them or what she would think of that situation. And so I'm kind of in that, that's a really deep one, but I don't mind sharing it. Because I believe,
thanks.
I believe that going through it means, hopefully other people can learn from that. Don't do that to your kids. Don't do that to your wife. Like,
right.
Like, tell them, hey guys, I know that what we did is going to hurt your mom, but we got to talk to her about it.
Yeah. There you go.
Like, don't hide stuff from her.
Yeah. And there's no need to be ashamed of a mistake. It's like, look at the good that's probably going to come of that. And it's not like it's unrecoverable. You and your wife now are benefiting from that having happened, and God's going to use it not only in your family's life, but now, because you just said it into that microphone, somebody else's. That's going to ring true for some dad rolling down the road, or walking, or sitting around listening to this from you.
Well, and honestly, it's something I learned from my dad, and so when I started to realize, after my dad died, I like, whenever somebody you love, that, like, when you have an awesome dad that dies, like, you kind of beatify him. Is that the right word? Like when you make someone a saint?
It is now. It
I'm
is
not
now.
Catholic, so I'm not positive, but you beatify somebody and you make them a saint, and so when after dad died, like, and my dad was an amazing dad. So like I had this beautiful, perfect picture of him. And then I started to realize like there's a lot of things I learned from him that I shouldn't have learned from him. Like I started to recognize the mistakes here lately because they were the same mistakes that I was repeating. And so I'm kind of trying to learn from that and work through that to make sure. And also having the conversations with my grown children now. I'm sorry for the way that I did that. It was wrong and it was a bad example. And they're receiving it pretty well for the most part. They'll say, thank you for sharing that. It means a lot to me.
That's cool
that you apologized for that. So
we hear a lot from the guys saying, that they're doing their best and getting encouragement from each other. We've got a cool way for people to go to the website for our podcast and leave us a message. They just click on a button and they can leave us a recording. And so we do get feedback. Kent gets a lot through email too, but it's not father on perfect. It's father on purpose, and purpose is trying. Purpose is having a thought process behind and gathering as much information as we can as dads to do it in a way that has a purpose. And that purpose is leading and discipling our kids and setting an example and being there for other dudes and being there for other dads and for our wives. So I love that you've kind of, thought this through in a way that is, how do you look back and see what happened, see what maybe didn't happen or something you got wrong, and then fold that back into your purpose of continuing to be better.
Lawson, I think that's the first time you've ever said it's not father on perfect, it's father on purpose. That's brilliant.
It's a great tagline.
We need to work that into our bumpers. Like, that was super, man. Well done. Josh, I think I cut you off. What were you going to say?
That's okay. I was going to say another thing with our family that I think is relevant and worth mentioning. So we've always been a ministry family, now I'll say this, and I'm sure somebody, hopefully not you guys, but somebody somewhere is going to get, like that twitch. My wife's the pastor of our church now, which she, that's a recent thing. Now, a lot of people are like, well, that can't happen. We're not even going to go there because it doesn't matter. But she was the children's ministry coordinator for a long time. I was the youth leader. I've been on the worship team. And, like ministry is our heart, and it always has been. And so from the time that our kids were old enough to serve, we've had them serving with us. So, they're little kids and we're going out, we're doing outreaches and handing out bottles of water and stuff. And they're doing that, or, as soon as they could start to play instruments, they're on we had a worship team and, and that was our family. And we would once a month we'd be up and we'd, we had a couple extra people because we didn't have all the instruments, but most of the kids, they all still sing and they serve. For a long time, my son did youth. All of my kids are involved in youth ministry, and their spouses are involved in youth ministry. And there's nothing that brings me greater joy than to watch them discipling people, because we did that together. I told everybody, I always wanted to have a band, and I didn't know I wasn't good enough, so I just made my own. Nobody wanted me in their band, so I just made my own band. But it's important for dads to know, first of all, I think, especially if you're a Christian dad, and I know that's probably the primary audience of this. Not everybody that listens to my podcast is a Christian, and that's on purpose. We could talk about that later if you want. But if you are a Christian dad, you have a responsibility to preach the gospel and to disciple people and to make disciples and to serve the church. So what better thing to do than to do it with your family? So you know what? If you don't know what to do, sign up as a greeter at your church and have your kids help. Or if you are a part of a small group, have your kids help get the house ready for your small group. Serve in the children's ministry. We need more dads in the kids ministry. Those kids need to see what a good dad looks like. Some of those kids in church have never seen a dad that loves Jesus. So show them that, because we need that. So do things like that with your kids, have them help you, get involved, do those things together, because, those are the opportunities where, like, when you're serving in ministry, like, oh, I don't know how we're going to handle this. We have an impossible situation. We need to pray. And so then you get to see your kids praying, or you get to pray for somebody who needs to be prayed for. They learn it on the job. That's how you do it, because it means nothing when it's all theory and books. Get out there and do it. Do it together.
Yeah. Wow. Josh, great word, man. I want to talk about your book briefly, and then I want to give you kind of the last word. Time flies. We've had a great conversation so far, and we'll definitely have to do this again in the future because there's a lot of unexplored topics that I'd love to dive into with you. Just based on what you shared, I wrote some of those down. Guys,
a really nice way to say that Josh has ADHD.
No, I mean, it's very interesting topics about how you guys figured out you were supposed to have kids, how you got married, even your dad passing away and the legacy and all the stuff, man. There's a lot of off ramps that I would love to take. Just for the sake of time, let me do this. I want to tell the dad listening, hey, Dad, if you're looking for a real and practical book that you can spin through that would help you grow as a man, go grab Josh's book on Amazon. It's called Manhood, easy to remember, the 12 Pillars of Masculinity. And it says right there, it will help men embrace their honor, help them live lives of integrity, strength, and passion. So, Dad,
love it.
What a cool subtext. Love that. Josh, take us where you want to go in terms of a final word or thought for the dad out there who's in the thick of raising kids. He's not where you are, right? His kids aren't like on the edge of being all gone like you are. He's 5 or 10 years ago. What's that thing you would have told a dad who's still got a bunch of kids underfoot and a lot of, activity still going on around the home? What's one thing you would say to encourage that dad who already probably feels like, he's a failure. He's not getting it done. Dads tell us that all the time. Give us a final word of encouragement. And then dads, go check out the Manhood Mancast and grab Josh's book, Manhood, the 12 Pillars of Masculinity, as soon as you possibly can. Josh, take it away.
Yeah, I would say this. Your kids need you. Everybody else in the world is going to tell you that they need the new Xbox and they need to play on the traveling sports team and that they need to have this money to do this thing or to have this thing. And you've got opportunities to go and work and make a bunch of money so that you can give the kid the thing. You know what your kid needs? Your kid needs 3 square meals a day and a roof over their head. And they need an education. And they need some clothes to wear. It's better for your kids to dress in hand-me-downs and, to play on a thrift store Game Boy, if you want them to have a video game. And it's better to have the smaller, older, still functional things, and to have a dad that's active and involved in their life. Yes, it would be great if we could all have this career that makes a ton of money. But it might not be what you've got. Don't assume that a bunch of overtime is going to solve your family problems. A bunch of money and a bigger paycheck is going to solve your family problems. You've got goals. I get it. You've got dreams. I get it. But the minute that you had a kid, that became your highest priority. And so, yes, you can work to take care of them. That's part of it. But what they need is you. They need time with you. And so don't beat yourself up over it. Don't, get in a hole. Don't feel like, oh, I don't know what to do. You know what? You can make money any day. You can go work any kind of job you need to work. But spend time with your kids. Make it a priority. And it's not always going to be easy. And sometimes you're probably not even going to like spending time with them. That just is, especially when they hit about 12-year-old girls and like 16-year-old boys. Because boys are cool at 12. It's when they're 16 that they hate you. And girls hate you when they're 12. So those ages are going to be tough. Spend time with them and love them anyway.
Man, that's a great word to end on. Josh, thank you so much. Our guest today has been Josh Hatcher. Go catch him at the Manhood Mancast. Lawson, as always, my friend, great to see you. Thanks for spending some time with me and Josh today. And Josh, thank you for being on the show, man. We were honored to have you.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys very much. Thank you.
Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.